Struggling artist donated her painting, never realizing it hid a Renaissance masterpiece. The words echoed in Eliza Mercer's mind as she stared at the blank canvas before her, the irony of her situation not lost on her. How many times had she dreamed of creating something truly remarkable, something that would outlive her? Now, at 32, with rent 3 weeks overdue and the persistent ache of failure gnawing at her chest, those dreams felt like cruel jokes whispered by a younger, more naive version of herself. Rain pelted against the windows of her tiny studio apartment, the cold seeping through poorly insulated walls. Her fingers, stained with various hues that never quite washed away, trembled slightly as she lifted her brush. Not from artistic passion, but from the simple fact that she'd skipped dinner, again, to afford the tubes of paint arranged meticulously on her weathered work table. The space heater in the corner sputtered, its orange coil the only source of warmth in the room. Eliza pulled her grandfather's old cardigan tighter around her shoulders, the wool worn thin from years of use, but still carrying the faint scent of pipe tobacco that reminded her of summer evenings on his porch, watching him paint the sunset while telling her stories of great artists throughout history. "Every painting has a story beneath it, Lizzie," he used to say. "Sometimes the most beautiful art is hidden beneath layers of something else entirely." She closed her eyes, remembering how his weathered hands would guide hers, teaching her to mix colors, to see not just objects but the light dancing across them. She was the only one who had inherited his passion, if not, she often feared, his talent. The eviction notice on her door gave her 7 days. 7 days to conjure enough money to keep a roof over her head, or she'd be packing what little she owned into her decade-old Honda. The gallery downtown had rejected her portfolio again with the same polite email they always sent. "While we appreciate your unique perspective, your work doesn't quite align with our current collection." Unique perspective. The phrase made her stomach twist. Code for not good enough to sell. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, Catherine. "The offer still stands, Liz. Sales team has an opening. Decent salary, benefits." "Think about it." Eliza's throat tightened. Catherine had always been the practical one. Business degree, corporate job, condo with a view of the city skyline. She meant well, but she'd never understood why Eliza couldn't just paint on weekends like normal people with hobbies. Because it wasn't a hobby. It was oxygen. The canvas before her remained stubbornly blank, mocking her with its emptiness. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof in an erratic rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She hadn't sold a piece in months. The community center classes she taught barely covered groceries, let alone rent, yet something inside her refused to surrender. It was the same stubborn spark that had kept her painting through her mother's illness, through the funeral, through the crushing student loans from an art degree that now seemed like an expensive exercise in futility. Her gaze drifted to the corner of her studio, where an ornate gilt frame leaned against the wall. Inside it, a large canvas she'd found at an estate sale 2 years ago. She'd been drawn to the frame rather than the painting itself, a dreary landscape that had clearly been someone's amateur attempt. The frame, though tarnished, was exquisitely carved with delicate floral patterns. She'd paid $40 for it, planning to remove the mediocre artwork and use the frame for one of her own pieces. But she'd never gotten around to it. Something about discarding another artist's work, however unremarkable, felt like bad karma. Now, with desperation clawing at her, Eliza crossed the room and lifted the heavy frame. The original landscape was dark with age, the colors muted beneath a layer of dust and neglect. She ran her fingers along the edge of the canvas, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingertips. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the unknown artist, "but I need this frame more than you do now." Tomorrow was the charity auction for the Children's Hospital. She'd volunteered to donate a piece, partly from genuine goodwill and partly hoping for exposure. If she worked through the night, she could create something new to fit this beautiful old frame, something that might catch someone's eye, lead to a commission, or at least a connection. With renewed determination, Eliza set the framed landscape aside and turned back to her blank canvas. She would sleep when the eviction notice was nothing but a bad memory. She would sleep when she'd proven, to her sister, to the galleries, to herself, that her grandfather's faith in her hadn't been misplaced. The brush felt alive in her hand as she began to paint, her strokes bold and defiant against the white canvas. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the walls of her small apartment, Eliza Mercer waged her own battle against the darkness. The saint? Vincent Children's Hospital auction bustled with Seattle's wealthy and philanthropic, the hotel ballroom transformed by twinkling lights and elegant floral arrangements. Men in tailored suits and women in designer dresses mingled, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter rising above the soft classical music played by a string quartet in the corner. Eliza stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling painfully out of place. She'd spent the morning ironing her one decent dress, a navy blue number she'd found on clearance 3 years ago. Her sister had offered to lend her something more suitable, but pride had made Eliza decline. She didn't want to pretend to be something she wasn't. Her painting, a vibrant cityscape at sunset, the Seattle skyline reflected in rain-slicked streets, hung among other donated artwork on the far wall. She'd worked through the night to finish it, pouring her frustration and hope into every brushstroke. It wasn't her best work, created too quickly under too much pressure, but she'd managed to capture something of the city's resilient spirit, the way light persisted even on the darkest days. She'd kept the ornate frame, though it had taken hours to clean and restore its gilded surface. Against her better judgment, she'd brought the original landscape with her as well, wrapped carefully in an old sheet and stowed in the trunk of her car. She couldn't explain why, but disposing of it had felt wrong somehow. First-time donor? The voice startled her. Eliza turned to find an elderly man standing beside her, his posture straight despite his evident age. Distinguished silver hair framed kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His suit was clearly expensive, but worn with the comfortable ease of someone who didn't need to impress anyone. "Is it that obvious?" she asked, self-consciously smoothing her dress. "Only to someone who's been attending these things for 4 decades. He extended his hand. "Thomas Harrington, Eliza Mercer." His handshake was firm but gentle. "And yes, first time. I teach art classes at the community center, and some of my students were treated here, so when they asked for donations..." She trailed off, not wanting to admit she'd hoped her work might catch someone's eye, might lead to a real opportunity. "Which one is yours?" Thomas asked, his gaze moving to the display of artwork. Eliza pointed to her cityscape, now partially obscured by a cluster of attendees. The Seattle sunset in the gold frame. Thomas made his way toward it, Eliza following hesitantly. As the group shifted, revealing her painting, she held her breath, suddenly seeing all its flaws. The rushed perspective, the slightly muddy color in one corner, the imperfect restoration of the frame. "Interesting choice of frame for such a contemporary piece," Thomas remarked, studying it with unexpected intensity. "It was a found object," Eliza admitted. "I discovered it at an estate sale." "Just the frame?" "No, it came with another painting, but it wasn't. It was just an old landscape. Nothing special." Thomas's eyes remained on the frame, his expression unreadable. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't immediately apparent. Before Eliza could respond, the auction coordinator approached, a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Harrington, we're about to begin. Your seat at the main table is ready." Thomas nodded, then turned back to Eliza. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Mercer. I hope your contribution does well tonight." As he walked away, Eliza felt a strange mixture of disappointment and curiosity. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at her painting, or rather, at the frame, that suggested recognition, or perhaps something deeper. The auction proceeded with professional efficiency. Eliza watched as items were presented and bid upon, the numbers casually tossed out representing months of her income. When her painting came up, her heart hammered against her ribs. The auctioneer described it briefly, mentioning her name and starting the bidding at a modest $100. For a terrible moment, no hands went up. Eliza's cheeks burned, and she contemplated slipping out before anyone could connect her to the rejected piece. Then, from the front table, $500. Thomas Harrington, his hand raised slightly. The auctioneer acknowledged him with a nod. $500 from Mr. Harrington. Do I hear 6? Silence fell over the room. $500 was generous for an unknown artist's work, especially at a charity auction where people were primarily there to support the cause, not discover new talent. Going once? Going twice. $1,000. A woman in the back had raised her paddle. Eliza couldn't see her clearly, just a silhouette of elegant posture and a distinctive silver streak in dark hair. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose slightly. $1,000? Do I hear 1,100? Thomas raised his paddle again. $1,500. A murmur went through the crowd. People were turning in their seats, curious about the unexpected bidding war over a painting that, while pleasant enough, was hardly the most impressive piece in the collection. $2,000, came the woman's response. Eliza felt lightheaded. $2,000 for her rushed cityscape? It didn't make sense. Thomas didn't hesitate. $3,000. The woman's paddle rose again. $5,000. The room had gone completely still now, all attention focused on the unexpected drama unfolding. Eliza's fingers pressed against her lips, her breath caught in her throat. Thomas turned in his chair, looking directly at the woman in the back. Something passed between them, an unspoken communication Eliza couldn't decipher. $10,000, he said, voice firm. The auctioneer, clearly delighted by this turn of events, looked toward the woman. After a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity, she lowered her paddle. $10,000 going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Harrington! Applause broke out, more for the generous donation than for the artwork itself. Eliza stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. $10,000 for her painting. Enough to pay her rent for a year. Enough to buy supplies, to focus on creating a real portfolio, to breathe. As the auction continued, she felt a presence beside her. The woman who had bid against Thomas now stood at her elbow, studying her with intelligent eyes. "Congratulations," she said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent Eliza couldn't place. "It seems Thomas wanted your work quite badly." "I don't understand," Eliza admitted. It's not worth that much?" The woman's lips curved into a slight smile. "Perhaps he sees something you don't." She extended a business card. "I'm Alexandra Valenti, curator at the Harrington Gallery. When you have a moment, I'd love to see more of your work." Eliza accepted the card with trembling fingers. The Harrington Gallery was one of the most prestigious in the city, the very one that had rejected her portfolio just weeks ago. "Thank you, but I've already submitted my portfolio to your gallery," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It wasn't a good fit." Alexandra's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did you? Interesting. Well, consider this a personal invitation to resubmit, directly to me this time." She glanced toward Thomas, who was now engaged in conversation with another patron. "I suspect there's more to your story than I initially realized." Before Eliza could respond, Alexandra melted back into the crowd, leaving her with more questions than answers. The business card in her hand felt impossibly heavy, weighted with potential and mystery. As the evening wound down, Thomas approached her again, auction receipt in hand. "Ms. Mercer, I believe this belongs to you," he said, handing her a check. "The organization takes a percentage, of course, but this should still be substantial." Eliza stared at the number. After the charity's share, she would receive $7,000. $7,000. Her vision blurred slightly. "Mr. Harrington, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous, but I don't understand why you would—" "I'd like to ask you something," he interrupted gently. "The original painting in that frame, you said you still have it?" She nodded, confused by the question. "Yes, it's in my car, actually. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away." Relief crossed his features. "Good. Very good. Would you consider bringing it to my office tomorrow? I'd like to see it." "The old landscape? But it's nothing special, just an amateur—" "Please," he said, his voice soft but insistent. "I have a theory I'd like to confirm, and it might be of great interest to you as well." Eliza studied his face, searching for some explanation. Finding none, but seeing only genuine interest and kindness, she nodded. "All right. Where and when?" Thomas wrote an address on the back of his business card. "My office, 10 tomorrow morning." "And Ms. Mercer?" His eyes held hers with unexpected intensity. "Don't show that painting to anyone else before then." As he walked away, leaving Eliza clutching a life-changing check and a cryptic invitation, she couldn't shake the feeling that the frame wasn't what had caught Thomas Harrington's attention after all. Eliza barely slept that night. The check sat on her nightstand, its presence both comforting and unsettling. $7,000. Enough to solve her immediate problems, enough to buy her time. But Thomas Harrington's interest in the old landscape painting nagged at her, a puzzle she couldn't solve. At 3 a.m., she found herself unwrapping the canvas from its protective sheet, studying it under the harsh light of her desk lamp. The painting was unremarkable, a darkened landscape showing what might be an Italian countryside, with cypress trees and distant hills. The brushwork was competent but uninspired, the colors muted by age and neglect. Nothing about it seemed worthy of Thomas Harrington's interest, yet something about his intensity, the unexpected bidding war, Alexandra Valenti's sudden interest in her work. None of it made sense unless the frame or the old painting held some value she couldn't see. By morning, fatigue had settled into her bones, but curiosity propelled her forward. She dressed carefully in her best jeans and a simple blouse, wrapped the old painting again, and headed downtown to the address Thomas had provided. The building was an unassuming brick structure in Pioneer Square, sandwiched between a coffee shop and a bookstore. A small brass plaque beside the door read simply, "Harrington Authentication and Restoration." Inside, a reception area decorated with understated elegance greeted her. The walls displayed before and after photographs of artwork, paintings transformed from darkened, damaged states to vibrant revelations of their original beauty. "Ms. Mercer?" The receptionist smiled warmly. "Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Please go right up, second floor, end of the hall." Eliza followed the instructions, the wrapped painting awkward in her arms. At the end of a hallway lined with more restoration photographs, she found a door standing ajar. Knocking gently, she pushed it open. The space beyond was unlike anything she had expected. Part office, part laboratory, part studio, it contained specialized equipment she recognized from her art conservation classes in college: microscopes, specialized lights, chemical cabinets, alongside easels and work tables. Morning light streamed through large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Thomas stood examining something under a magnifying glass, but looked up at her entrance, his face brightening. "Eliza, thank you for coming." He gestured to the wrapped canvas. "You brought it." "Yes, though I still don't understand why you're interested in it." He set aside his tools and crossed to her, taking the painting with careful hands. "Let's have a look, shall we?" Thomas unwrapped the canvas with the practiced movements of someone who had handled countless fragile artworks. As the landscape was revealed, he made no immediate comment, but carried it to a large table bathed in natural light. Eliza followed, watching as he studied the surface, his fingers hovering just above the paint. "You said you found this at an estate sale?" he asked, not looking up. "Yes, about 2 years ago. I bought it for the frame, honestly. The painting itself didn't seem, well, worth keeping." Thomas nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "And you didn't attempt to clean it or restore it in any way?" "No. I was going to remove it from the frame eventually, but never got around to it." He reached for a small ultraviolet light and passed it slowly over the surface of the painting. Then, with gentle fingers, he probed at the edge of the canvas where it met the frame, his expression intensifying. "Eliza," he said finally, looking up at her with eyes that seemed to hold both excitement and caution, "what do you know about pentimenti?" The term triggered a distant memory from her art history classes. It refers to alterations in a painting, right? When an artist changes their mind and paints over their original work? Exactly. The word comes from the Italian pentirsi, to repent. Artists often revise their compositions, and sometimes those earlier elements become visible over time as top layers fade or become transparent. He gestured for her to come closer, pointing to a section of sky in the unremarkable landscape. "Look here, at this patch of blue. Do you see how there's a faint outline beneath it? Something that doesn't match the composition?" Eliza leaned in, squinting. At first, she saw nothing unusual, but then, yes, a curved line that had no place in the sky, the ghost of something hidden beneath the surface. "I see it," she said, her pulse quickening. "What is it?" Instead of answering directly, Thomas moved to a computer on a nearby desk and pulled up an image. "This is a scan I took of a section of your frame last night, after the auction. The gilding technique and carved pattern are distinctive of the workshop of Bartolomeo Belli, active in Florence in the early 16th century. Eliza's mouth went dry. "Renaissance?" "Indeed. And such frames were rarely paired with amateur works." He turned back to the landscape. "I believe what we're looking at here is an overpaint, a completely different artwork painted on top of an older one, probably in the 18th or 19th century when the original was damaged or considered unfashionable." The implication hung in the air between them. Eliza's heart began to pound against her ribs. "Are you saying—" Thomas smiled, the expression both gentle and exhilarated. "I'm saying we need to perform some tests. With your permission, of course, as the owner." "Tests?" Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Non-invasive to start. Infrared reflectography, X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. Techniques that allow us to see beneath the surface without damaging the painting. Eliza found herself nodding, though a part of her remained convinced this must be some elaborate mistake. How long will it take? Initial results can be available quite quickly. More comprehensive analysis takes time. He paused, studying her face. Eliza, I want to be clear about something. What I suspect may be beneath this landscape would be a significant discovery, but authentication is a complex process. I don't want to create false hope. What exactly do you suspect? She asked, the question barely audible. Thomas hesitated. Based on the frame, the visible pentimenti, and certain stylistic elements I can just detect, I believe we may be looking at a lost work from one of the Renaissance masters, possibly from the Florentine school, mid to late 15th century. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Eliza gripped the edge of the table, steadying herself. That's not possible. I bought this for $40 at an estate sale in Ballard. Art history is full of such stories, Thomas said, his voice kind. Masterpieces discovered in attics, behind walls, in second-hand shops. Works travel strange paths through centuries, their true nature often forgotten or disguised. But wouldn't someone have noticed? The family who sold it, or not necessarily. To an untrained eye, it's just a dark, old painting in a nice frame. And if it's been overpainted, as I suspect, its true identity has been literally concealed. Eliza looked back at the landscape, seeing it with new eyes, not as a mediocre artwork, but as a potential disguise for something extraordinary. Something that had been sitting in her apartment for 2 years, leaning against her wall while she struggled to pay rent. What happens now? She asked, her voice steadier than she expected. With your permission, my team and I will begin non-invasive testing today. I suggest you go home, get some rest. This will take time and the process can be emotionally complicated for the owner. I'd like to stay, she said firmly. I want to see. Thomas studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well. But first, there's something we should discuss. He gestured to 2 chairs in the corner of the studio. The business side of this situation. They sat, and Thomas leaned forward, his expression serious. If, and I stress if, this painting proves to be what I suspect, its value would be substantial. Museums, private collectors worldwide would take interest. But authentication, restoration, marketing, these are complex processes requiring expertise. Are you offering to help with that? Eliza asked. I'm proposing a partnership. My firm would handle authentication, restoration, and ultimately finding the right placement for the work, whether museum or private collection. In return, we would take a percentage of the final sale. What percentage? 30%. Standard for discoveries of this potential magnitude, covering our considerable costs and expertise. Eliza did rapid calculations in her head. Even if the painting sold for a fraction of what a Renaissance masterpiece might command, it would still transform her life completely. And if it turns out to be nothing special after all? Thomas smiled slightly. Then I've wasted my time and resources, and you have an interesting story to tell. But I should note, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I'm rarely wrong about these intuitions. She extended her hand. All right, Mr. Harrington, you have a deal. As they shook hands, Eliza couldn't help feeling she had just stepped off the edge of her known world into something both terrifying and wondrous. The struggling artist who had been facing eviction a day ago was now watching as white-gloved assistants carefully transported her $40 estate sale find to a high-tech imaging station. One more thing, Thomas said as they prepared to begin testing. Alexandra Valenti, the woman from the auction, is my business partner and goddaughter. I've asked her to join us this afternoon. She has connections with major European museums that may prove valuable. Eliza remembered the elegant woman with the silver streak in her hair, the business card still tucked in her wallet. She seemed to think you knew something about the painting even at the auction. We've worked together long enough that she recognizes when something has caught my interest. He smiled wryly. Though I suspect she also bid against me to drive up the price for your benefit. Alexandra has a soft spot for artists. As the morning progressed into afternoon, Eliza watched in fascination as Thomas and his team worked. They photographed the painting under different light conditions, used specialized cameras to capture infrared images, and consulted in hushed, excited tones over the computer screens displaying their findings. Alexandra arrived shortly after lunch, greeting Eliza warmly before joining Thomas at the imaging station. Their conversation became increasingly animated as they examined the results together. Finally, Thomas beckoned Eliza over. On the computer screen before him was a ghostly image, the infrared scan of her painting. "Look," he said simply. The mediocre landscape had vanished. In its place, clearly visible despite centuries of concealment, was something else entirely. The delicate outline of a woman's face in profile, her features serene, her hair elaborately dressed with what appeared to be pearls or jewels. Behind her, architectural elements suggested a formal interior space. "It's a portrait," Eliza breathed, leaning closer. "Not just any portrait," Alexandra said, her voice reverent. "The composition, the distinctive handling of the profile format. Thomas, are you thinking what I'm thinking?" He nodded slowly. "The technique is unmistakable. Those flowing lines, the economy of the underdrawing. This bears all the hallmarks of Sandro Botticelli. The name hung in the air like a spell. Botticelli, creator of The Birth of Venus and Primavera, one of the most celebrated artists of the Italian Renaissance." "That's impossible," Eliza whispered, though the evidence was before her eyes. "Not impossible," Thomas corrected gently. "Improbable, certainly. Extraordinary, without question, but not impossible." Alexandra was already typing rapidly on her tablet. There are several documented lost Botticelli portraits. The 1475 portrait of Simonetta Vespucci in profile was described in correspondence but never located, and the 1490 portrait commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici of his distant cousin. "We're getting ahead of ourselves," Thomas cautioned. "Further tests are needed before we can make such specific attributions." But his eyes shone with barely contained excitement that belied his measured words. Eliza stood speechless, staring at the ghostly face that had been hiding in her apartment for 2 years, sleeping against her wall while she worried about making rent. "What happens now?" she finally managed to ask. "Now," Thomas said, "we begin the delicate process of determining exactly what we have, and eventually how to safely remove the overpaint to reveal what lies beneath." He turned to her, his expression serious despite his evident excitement. "Eliza, I want you to understand something. This process will take months, not days. And until we're certain, this must remain absolutely confidential." "Why?" Alexandra answered. "Because the art world runs on reputation and verification. Premature claims could damage the painting's provenance and value. And ... She hesitated. "There are also security concerns with discoveries of this magnitude." Eliza hadn't considered that aspect. The thought that her $40 estate sale find might now need security was surreal. "I understand," she said. "I won't tell anyone." As evening approached, they agreed to reconvene the following day. Thomas would begin assembling a specialized team for the project, experts who could be trusted with both discretion and the delicate work ahead. Stepping out into the fading light, check still in her purse but now seeming almost inconsequential compared to what the day had revealed, Eliza felt strangely disconnected from her surroundings. The same streets she had walked yesterday were physically unchanged, yet everything felt different. She had entered Thomas's studio as a struggling artist who had lucked into a surprising sale. She was leaving as the potential owner of a lost Renaissance masterpiece. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Did the auction go okay? Call me." Eliza stared at the message, the normal concerns of yesterday. Rent, groceries, rejection, suddenly distant. How could she possibly explain what was happening without breaking her promise of confidentiality? She typed back, "Better than okay. Can't talk details yet, but things are looking up. Love you." Putting her phone away, she began the walk to her bus stop, the city around her both familiar and utterly transformed by possibility. The following weeks unfolded in a dreamlike blur. By day, Eliza watched as Thomas's team conducted increasingly sophisticated tests on the painting, building evidence for what had initially seemed impossible. By night, she returned to her tiny apartment, rent now paid 3 months in advance, and tried to process the seismic shift in her circumstances. She continued teaching her community center classes, finding comfort in their normalcy. The children noticed her distraction but attributed it to artistic temperament. Her sister Catherine sensed something significant had changed, but respected Eliza's cryptic explanations that she was involved in a promising project she couldn't yet discuss. In Thomas's studio, revelations accumulated. X-ray fluorescence confirmed pigments consistent with 15th-century Florentine workshops. Careful examination of the canvas structure and stretcher revealed telling signs of historic restoration. Each discovery reinforced Thomas's initial hypothesis. Beneath the unremarkable landscape lay a portrait almost certainly from the workshop of Sandro Botticelli, and possibly by the master's own hand. The composition matches descriptions in Lorenzo de' Medici's correspondence from 1491, Alexandra explained one afternoon, showing Eliza documents on her tablet. He commissioned a portrait of his cousin Fioretta Guerini, who some scholars believe was Botticelli's model for several paintings. How did it end up overpainted and forgotten? Eliza asked, still struggling to connect the artwork's illustrious origins with its journey to a Seattle estate sale. Thomas's expression grew thoughtful. That's the detective work of provenance research. Our preliminary findings suggest the painting left Italy during the Napoleonic era, when many aristocratic collections were dispersed. It appears in an 1823 auction catalogue in Paris, then vanishes from record. My theory, Alexandra added, is that it was damaged during transport or improper storage. Rather than attempt restoration with the limited techniques available then, someone simply had it overpainted with a more contemporary style. The landscape disguising it likely dates to the 1840s or 50s. And then, Eliza prompted, and then it begins the quiet journey of forgotten artworks. Private collections, inheritances, perhaps changing hands during financial hardships. Thomas smiled ruefully. Art history is full of masterpieces that slipped into obscurity, their true nature concealed by time, neglect, or intentional disguise. The most difficult decision they now faced was whether to attempt removal of the overpaint to reveal the Botticelli portrait beneath. The process carried risks, damage to the original work, discovery that the underlying painting was less significant than hoped, or that it had deteriorated beyond recovery. "It's your decision, Eliza," Thomas said gravely when the moment for choice arrived. "As the owner, only you can authorize this step." They stood before the painting, now carefully removed from its Renaissance frame and secured in a custom-built support structure. The landscape seemed to Eliza both mundane and magical now, a veil between present and past, between struggling obscurity and astonishing revelation. "What would you do?" she asked quietly. Thomas considered before answering. "I believe the evidence is compelling enough to warrant the risk. The potential historical and artistic significance outweighs the danger, especially with our modern conservation techniques." Alexandra nodded her agreement. "This isn't just about monetary value. If this is indeed Botticelli's lost portrait of Fioretta, it fills a gap in art historical knowledge. It belongs to humanity's cultural heritage." Eliza looked at the painting that had leaned forgotten against her wall while she skipped meals to buy paint. The painting that might transform her life completely. The painting that connected her, somehow, across centuries to another artist's hands and vision. "Do it," she said finally. "Let's find out what's really there." The restoration process began the following week, with a team of specialists assembled from across the country. The work required patience and precision beyond anything Eliza had imagined. Solvents were tested on minute sections to determine the safest removal method. A state-of-the-art digital mapping system tracked every millimeter of progress. Eliza was permitted to observe at key stages, watching with bated breath as the landscape gradually surrendered its secret. First came the confirmation that a formal portrait indeed lay beneath, the elegant curve of a jawline revealed, then the suggestion of an elaborate headdress. 3 weeks into the process, Thomas called her with barely contained excitement. "You need to come to the studio, now." She arrived to find him standing before the painting, which was now partly revealed, the right side of the portrait visible while the left remained concealed beneath landscape. But what was visible took her breath away. A young woman's face in perfect profile, her expression serene, her features delicate and aristocratic. The undeniable grace of Renaissance portraiture had emerged from its centuries-long hiding place. "My God," Eliza whispered. "Indeed," Thomas said, his voice hushed with reverence. "Eliza, every indication confirms our initial assessment. The technique, the materials, the stylistic elements, this is unquestionably from Botticelli's workshop, and the quality suggests the master's own hand, at least in the face and hands." Alexandra approached, carrying a large art book. "Compare," she said simply, opening to a colored plate showing Botticelli's famous Portrait of a Young Woman from the Uffizi Gallery. The similarities were striking, the same delicate modeling of features, the distinctive handling of the profile format, the luminous quality of the skin tones. How much more restoration is needed? Eliza asked. Another month at least, Thomas replied. The landscape overpaint is stubborn in sections, and we're proceeding with extreme caution. As the restoration continued, interest in the project intensified within the small circle of specialists involved. Word of a potential Botticelli discovery had begun to circulate discreetly among museum curators and art historians, though the painting's owner remained anonymous at Thomas and Alexandra's insistence. Once the restoration is complete and preliminary authentication confirmed, Alexandra explained, we'll need to make decisions about next steps. Public announcement, exhibition possibilities, authentication by international experts. And eventually, Thomas added carefully, decisions about the painting's future. By this, Eliza understood he meant its sale. The unspoken question of what one does when unexpectedly in possession of an artwork potentially worth millions hung between them. As spring yielded to summer, Eliza's external life maintained its familiar patterns while her internal landscape transformed completely. She continued teaching, painting in her tiny studio, meeting friends for coffee, all while carrying the secret knowledge of what waited in Thomas's workshop. She found herself drawn to research on Botticelli, on Renaissance Florence, on the world that had produced the portrait gradually emerging from concealment. In quiet evenings, she read about Lorenzo de' Medici's court, about the artistic ferment of 1490s Florence, about Fioretta Guerini, who might be the subject of her painting. One warm July afternoon, Thomas called. "It's done," he said simply. "The restoration is complete." The studio was unusually quiet when she arrived. Thomas and Alexandra waited beside an easel draped with a cloth. 3 other specialists, the core restoration team, stood nearby, their expressions a mixture of solemnity and barely contained excitement. "Ready?" Thomas asked. Eliza nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He removed the cloth with a gentle flourish. The portrait that had been hiding for centuries now revealed itself fully. A young woman in perfect Renaissance profile, her features delicate yet strong, her expression composed. She wore an elaborate dress of deep crimson, its fabric rendered with stunning attention to texture and light. Pearls adorned her intricately arranged dark hair, and a pendant bearing what appeared to be the Medici emblem rested at her throat. The background showed an architectural interior with a window opening onto a distant landscape, a compositional device characteristic of Botticelli's portrait work. Most striking was the luminous quality of the painting, the way light seemed to emanate from within the pigments themselves, bringing the young woman to life across the centuries. "She's beautiful," Eliza whispered. "She is," Alexandra agreed softly. "And remarkably well preserved beneath that landscape." Thomas cleared his throat, visibly moved. The technical analysis is conclusive. Dating of materials, pigment composition, underdrawing technique, all consistent with Botticelli's documented works from 1490 to 92. Stylistic analysis confirms what our eyes tell us. This is a masterwork from one of the greatest artists of the Renaissance. Our research team has also made progress on identification, Alexandra added. Letters in the Medici archives reference this commission explicitly, a portrait of Fioretta Guerini, commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici shortly before his death. Scholars have long searched for this work. One of the conservators stepped forward. "Miss Mercer, in my 30 years of restoration work, I've never been part of a discovery of this magnitude. It's the kind of moment we dream of in our field." Eliza stood transfixed before the painting, her painting, trying to process the reality of what had emerged from beneath that unremarkable landscape. The woman in the portrait seemed to regard her across 5 centuries with quiet dignity, as if patiently waiting all this time to be seen again. "What happens now?" she asked finally. Thomas and Alexandra exchanged glances. "Now we move to formal authentication," Thomas explained. "We've already arranged for 3 independent experts to examine the work next week, quietly under confidentiality agreements. Their confirmation will establish the scholarly consensus needed for official attribution. And then," Alexandra's expression grew serious, "then we face practical decisions. A discovery of this significance attracts attention from museums, collectors, the media, and unfortunately, less savory elements as well. What Alexandra means?" Thomas clarified, "is that once the authentication is complete and before any public announcement, we need to address security concerns and make decisions about the painting's future." They moved to the sitting area of the studio, where Alexandra laid out the options with characteristic directness. "Option 1, We arrange a private sale to a major collector. This would be the most discreet approach and likely the most financially advantageous to you. Option 2. Thomas continued, we work with one of the major auction houses for a high-profile public sale. This would generate significant publicity and potentially a record price, but involves more complex logistics and security considerations. Option 3. Alexandra said, watching Eliza carefully, we facilitate acquisition by a major museum. The financial return might be somewhat less than private sale, but ensures the painting will be preserved for public viewing and study. Eliza looked back at the portrait, at Fioretta Guerini, who had gazed serenely from within a forgotten canvas for centuries. What kind of value are we talking about? She asked quietly. Thomas hesitated. It's difficult to estimate precisely. The last Botticelli portrait to come to market sold for $92 million 2 years ago. Given this work's historical significance, exceptional condition, and the dramatic story of its discovery, he paused. We could be looking at a figure approaching or exceeding $100 million. The number hung in the air, too vast to comprehend. Eliza thought of her overdue rent notice just months ago, of skipping meals to buy paint, of her sister's well-intentioned offers of a real job. I need time, she said finally, to think about this. Of course, Thomas agreed. There's no rush to decide, but I would suggest keeping the discovery confidential until we've completed formal authentication and secured appropriate insurance and security. As she prepared to leave, Alexandra walked her to the door. You know, she said quietly, when Thomas first spotted that frame at the auction, he suspected we might find something interesting. But none of us imagined this, she smiled. Sometimes the universe has a remarkable sense of timing. What do you mean? Your painting found its way to you, an artist who recognized the value of the frame enough to preserve it, who happened to donate it to an auction where Thomas would see it, at precisely the moment when you needed a miracle. She squeezed Eliza's arm gently. Some might call that fate. Walking home through the summer evening, Eliza felt suspended between worlds, between the struggling artist who had faced eviction and the woman who now owned a priceless masterpiece, between her ordinary life and the extraordinary revelation unfolding in Thomas's studio. The weight of decision pressed upon her. What does one do when handed both opportunity and responsibility of such magnitude? What was her obligation to the artwork itself, to history, to her own future? Her phone chimed with a text from Catherine. Haven't heard from you in days. Everything okay? Eliza paused on the sidewalk, the normal world continuing around her, people hurrying home from work, a bus rumbling past, the smell of restaurant dinners wafting through open doors. Everything's changing, she typed back, in ways I never imagined. Can we meet tomorrow? I need advice. As she continued toward home, toward the tiny apartment that had seemed so precarious just months ago, Eliza felt the first stirrings of clarity about what she wanted to do with her unexpected fortune, both for herself and for the serene-faced woman who had waited centuries to be seen again. The outdoor cafe buzzed with lunchtime conversation, the summer sun filtering through canvas umbrellas. Eliza arrived early, securing a corner table that offered some privacy. She had slept little, her mind racing with possibilities, with the enormity of decisions before her. Catherine appeared precisely on time, as always, hair perfectly styled, designer sunglasses perched atop her head, the embodiment of the organized efficiency Eliza had both admired and chafed against throughout their relationship. You look different, Catherine said after they'd hugged and settled at the table. Not bad different. Just, I don't know. There's something changed about you, Eliza smiled. A lot has changed. I'm just not sure how to explain it. Is this about the auction? You've been mysterious about that for weeks. Partly? Eliza took a deep breath. I need your advice, but first I need you to promise absolute confidentiality. I mean it, Kathy. Not even Rob can know about this conversation. Rob, Catherine's husband, was a financial advisor who had often offered Eliza well-intentioned but unwelcome suggestions about her career choices. Catherine's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. Of course. Sister Vault, what's going on? Eliza leaned forward. What would you do if you suddenly came into a large amount of money? I mean, life-changing money. Define life-changing. Many millions? Catherine's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Eliza, what have you done? Please tell me you haven't gotten involved in something illegal. Nothing illegal, Eliza assured her hastily. It's completely legitimate. I just can't give you all the details yet. Setting down her cup carefully, Catherine studied her sister's face. Are we talking lottery? Inheritance from some unknown relative? What? Something I owned turned out to be valuable. Much more valuable than I realized. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. One of your paintings? Liz, that's wonderful. I always told you, not one of mine. Eliza interrupted. Something else. The point is, I'm going to receive a substantial sum, and I need to make decisions. Smart decisions. And that's your department. Catherine's professional instincts engaged visibly. All right. Well, first you'd need to consider tax implications, which depend on the nature of the asset and how long you've owned it. Then investment strategy based on your goals? My goals? Eliza repeated softly. That's the part I'm struggling with. What do you mean? Eliza gazed past her sister at the bustling street, at people hurrying through their ordinary Tuesday with ordinary concerns. All my life I've been focused on survival, paying rent, buying supplies, finding teaching gigs. Even my art has been constrained by necessity. She looked back at Catherine. Suddenly having options, real options, is overwhelming. Catherine's expression softened. Oh, Liz. I've always worried about your financial instability, but I've never doubted your clarity of purpose. You've known what matters to you since we were kids. And what's that? Creating, connecting, seeing beauty and helping others see it too. Catherine reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Money doesn't change that. It just gives you more freedom to pursue it. Eliza felt tears threatening. Her relationship with her sister had always been complicated, Catherine's practicality clashing with her own artistic temperament, but in this moment, she felt profoundly understood. I've been thinking about a foundation, she said quietly. Something to support young artists, community art programs, the kind of thing that would have made my path easier. Catherine nodded approvingly. That's a wonderful idea. We could structure it for maximum tax efficiency too. Her mind was clearly already working on the practical aspects. How soon will this money materialize? Within months, probably. There are processes that need to be completed first. And the total amount? I know you said millions, but for proper planning, I'd need to... Around 100 million, Eliza said softly. Give or take. Catherine's professional composure cracked entirely. 100? Eliza, what the hell did you find? I can't tell you yet. I promised. But it's real and it's happening and I'm terrified, honestly. The admission escaped before she could contain it. What if I mess this up? What if I make all the wrong choices? Catherine recovered quickly, reaching for her sister's hands across the table. Listen to me. You won't mess this up because you won't be doing it alone. You'll have advisors, financial, legal, tax specialists, and you'll have me. You have your own career, your own life, and a sister who's apparently about to become one of the wealthiest women in Seattle, Catherine said with a small smile. Family comes first, Liz. Always has. As their conversation continued, Eliza felt a weight lifting. They discussed practical considerations, security, privacy, investment strategies, but also deeper questions about purpose and responsibility. Catherine, ever practical, took notes on her tablet, already outlining the structure for the foundation Eliza envisioned. What about your art? Catherine asked eventually. Will you keep painting? Yes, Eliza said without hesitation. That won't change. But maybe I can approach it differently now, without the pressure of selling, without compromising for commercial appeal. The way grandfather did, Catherine observed thoughtfully. Exactly. Their grandfather had painted purely for the joy of creation, unconcerned with markets or trends. His modest pension had afforded him that freedom, a freedom Eliza had never known in her own artistic life. As they parted with a long hug, Catherine whispered, "I'm proud of you, Liz. Not because of this money, whatever it is, but because you're already thinking about how to use it well." Walking home, Eliza felt more centered than she had since Thomas first recognized the significance of her painting. The foundation idea had been forming in her mind for days, but speaking it aloud to Catherine had crystallized her intentions. She would create opportunities for others while honoring the artwork that had transformed her life. Fioretta's portrait, she had begun thinking of it by the subject's name, deserved to be seen, to be studied, to inspire. And Eliza herself deserved the freedom to create without constraint, the security she had never known. Her phone chimed with a message from Thomas. Authentication team arriving tomorrow. 10 a.m. if you'd like to be present. Another step in the journey. Another day in her new reality. I'll be there, she replied. The formal authentication process unfolded with meticulous precision over the following weeks. 3 internationally renowned experts examined the painting independently, each reaching the same conclusion. The portrait was unquestionably by Sandro Botticelli, dating from approximately 1491, and represented a significant addition to the master's known body of work. Historical research confirmed its subject as Fioretta Guerini, whose connection to the Medici family and rumored relationship with Botticelli's patron Giuliano de' Medici made the portrait particularly significant. The distinctive pendant at her throat, bearing the Medici emblem, suggested the commission had political as well as aesthetic purposes, a visual confirmation of her place in Florence's most powerful family network. As authentication concluded, the practical questions of the painting's future became more pressing. Thomas arranged a confidential meeting with representatives from 3 major institutions: the National Gallery in London, the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. Each has expressed serious interest, he explained to Eliza, though of course private collectors would likely offer substantially more. They sat in Thomas's office, the portrait now securely housed in a custom-built climate-controlled case nearby. Eliza found herself constantly drawn to Fioretta's serene profile, the woman who had inadvertently changed her life. "I've been thinking about this a lot," she said slowly. "About what feels right?" Alexandra leaned forward. "And what conclusion have you reached?" "She belongs in Florence," Eliza said simply. "With Botticelli's other works in the city where she lived, where she was painted, the Uffizi makes the most sense." Thomas nodded, unsurprised. "I suspected you might feel that way. The historical and artistic continuity is compelling. The Uffizi will certainly offer less than private collectors," Alexandra cautioned. "Their acquisition budget is more limited than the Met's, for instance." "I understand, but I'm not looking to maximize profit." Eliza took a deep breath. "I want to structure the sale as part donation. I'll accept a lower price with conditions: public display, educational access, and funding for a foundation I'm establishing." Thomas and Alexandra exchanged glances. "What kind of foundation?" Thomas asked. "The Fioretta Foundation for Artistic Development," Eliza explained. "Supporting young artists, community programs, conservation training. Things that would have helped me and that will help preserve works like this for future generations." Alexandra's expression softened. "That's a beautiful concept, Eliza. Honoring both the painting's subject and your own journey. The Uffizi would likely be receptive to such terms," Thomas added, "especially if the acquisition brings such a significant Botticelli back to Florence. Their director has a particular interest in reuniting dispersed Renaissance works with their original contexts." The negotiations proceeded carefully over the following month. Eliza, guided by Thomas, Alexandra, and a team of advisors Catherine had helped assemble, crafted an agreement that balanced financial considerations with her vision for the painting's future and her foundation's mission. The final arrangement involved a partial sale to the Uffizi for €40 million, approximately $45 million, with the remainder of the painting's assessed value, some $60 million, structured as a tax-deductible donation. The agreement included provisions for the portrait's permanent display in the Botticelli Room, educational programming around its discovery, and collaborative initiatives with Eliza's new foundation. As autumn painted Seattle in gold and crimson, preparations began for the painting's carefully choreographed journey to its new home. The Uffizi planned a major unveiling exhibition for the spring, documenting both Botticelli's artistry and the extraordinary story of the portrait's concealment and rediscovery. Before the painting left American soil, Thomas arranged a private viewing evening, a chance for Eliza to say goodbye to Fioretta in the space where her true identity had been revealed. The studio was transformed for the occasion, subtly lit to showcase the portrait to its best advantage. Thomas, Alexandra, and the core restoration team gathered to celebrate what they had accomplished together. "I've been in this business for 40 years, Thomas said, raising a glass of champagne, "and I can say without hesitation that this discovery has been the highlight of my career. Not just because of the painting's significance, but because of the journey we've shared." He turned to Eliza. "And because it couldn't have happened to a more deserving person." Eliza, dressed in a simple black dress that Catherine had helped her select, felt a curious mixture of emotions: joy, accomplishment, and a tinge of sadness at the approaching separation from the artwork that had transformed her life. "I have something for you," Alexandra said, presenting Eliza with an elegant portfolio. "Documentation of the entire process, the discovery, testing, restoration. A complete record for your foundation's archives." As the evening progressed, Eliza found herself standing alone before the portrait, studying Fioretta's face one last time. The young woman's serene expression seemed to hold secrets still, the hint of a smile, perhaps, or a quiet knowledge in her eyes. "Thank you," Eliza whispered, "for finding your way to me." The painting would depart the following week, traveling with a security detail and conservation specialist to ensure its safe arrival in Florence. Eliza had been invited to attend the official unveiling in the spring, a journey she both anticipated and dreaded, knowing it would mark the final chapter of this unexpected story. As guests began to depart, Thomas joined her before the portrait. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "in my experience, great artworks have a way of finding exactly where they need to be, when they need to be there." "You think it was meant to find me?" Eliza asked, smiling slightly at the notion. "I think you were meant to find each other," he corrected gently. "Two artists, separated by centuries but connected by circumstance. You rescued her from obscurity, and in return, she changed everything," Eliza finished. Later that night, alone in her apartment, which she would soon leave for a more secure building, another change in her rapidly transforming life, Eliza stood before her easel. A blank canvas waited, just as it had on the night before the auction that had set everything in motion. But this time, there was no desperate fear of eviction, no gnawing hunger, no sense of impending failure. Instead, there was simply the pure creative impulse that had first drawn her to art as a child, watching her grandfather paint summer sunsets. Her brush moved with newfound freedom, creating not what would sell or please others, but what she truly wished to express. As the painting took form beneath her hands, Eliza realized she was creating a modern portrait inspired by Fioretta, a woman gazing forward rather than in profile, her expression containing both the serenity of the Renaissance and the complexity of contemporary experience. Outside, rain fell gently against her windows, a soothing rhythm rather than the threatening drumbeat it had seemed months before. Across the city, Fioretta's portrait rested securely in its climate-controlled case, waiting to begin its journey home to Florence. Two artists separated by centuries, two women, each in her own way emerging from concealment into light. As Eliza painted through the night, she felt a profound sense of connection to her craft, to history, to possibility, and to the mysterious currents that had brought a forgotten masterpiece into her life exactly when she needed it most. Spring arrived in Florence with theatrical perfection, sun-drenched piazzas, blooming gardens, the Arno River reflecting Renaissance bridges and palaces with postcard precision. Standing at her hotel window, Eliza breathed in the scent of flowers from the courtyard below, still hardly believing the journey that had brought her here. 6 months had passed since the authentication of Fioretta's portrait. 6 months of profound transformation. A new home, the establishment of her foundation, the careful management of her suddenly complex financial life. Through it all, she had continued painting with a freedom and authenticity she'd never before experienced, creating work that pleased her first, unconcerned with commercial appeal. Today marked the official unveiling of Portrait of Fioretta Guerini at the Uffizi Gallery. Journalists from around the world had gathered for the event, drawn by the dramatic story of the painting's discovery. Thomas and Alexandra had arrived the previous day, joining Eliza for dinner at a trattoria near the Ponte Vecchio, where they'd toasted their extraordinary shared adventure. "Nervous?" Catherine asked, emerging from the bathroom of their shared suite. She had insisted on accompanying Eliza for this milestone event, handling the practical details of travel arrangements and media interactions with characteristic efficiency. "Not nervous exactly," Eliza replied. "More? I don't know. It feels like saying goodbye." Catherine squeezed her shoulder gently. "Not goodbye, just letting her take her rightful place in history." They made their way to the Uffizi, where a small crowd of journalists and art world dignitaries had gathered in the gallery's press room. The painting itself remained concealed behind velvet curtains on a temporary display stand, waiting for the official unveiling. The gallery director, Dr. Isabella Ricci, greeted Eliza warmly. "We cannot thank you enough for your generosity in ensuring this masterpiece returned to Florence," she said. "Your vision for the partnership between the Uffizi and your foundation is truly inspiring." As they spoke, Eliza noticed Thomas in conversation with an elderly man whose lined face seemed vaguely familiar. Catching her glance, Thomas beckoned her over. "Eliza, I'd like you to meet Professor Marco Vespucci." He's been instrumental in researching Fioretta's connection to the Medici family. Vespucci? Eliza repeated, recognition dawning. As in, the old man smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening. Yes, the same family as Amerigo, and more relevantly as Simonetta Vespucci, who was Botticelli's model for The Birth of Venus, and also, he added with a twinkle in his eye, as Fioretta herself, who married into our family shortly after this portrait was painted. Professor Vespucci has made a remarkable discovery in his family archives, Thomas explained, documents that trace the portrait's journey after it left the Medici collection. Indeed, the professor continued, letters suggesting the painting was given to Fioretta herself after her marriage, remaining in our family collection until the Napoleonic era, when many aristocratic families sold treasures to survive the economic turmoil. Eliza felt a shiver of connection to the past, another piece of the portrait's long journey falling into place. As the time for the unveiling approached, Dr. Ricci guided Eliza to her place beside the curtain display. The press room had filled with journalists and cameras. Alexandra and Catherine stood supportively nearby, while Thomas had taken a position beside Professor Vespucci in the front row. Ladies and gentlemen, Doctor, Ricci began, today we celebrate an extraordinary homecoming. After more than 5 centuries, Sandro Botticelli's portrait of Fioretta Guerini returns to Florence to take its place among the master's greatest works. She recounted the painting's remarkable discovery, how a struggling artist in Seattle had unknowingly purchased a Renaissance masterpiece disguised beneath a later landscape, how it had been recognized by Thomas Harrington and meticulously restored. We are deeply grateful to Ms. Eliza Mercer, Dr. Ricci continued, not only for ensuring this treasure returned to its rightful home in Florence, but for her vision in establishing the Fioretta Foundation, which will support artistic development and conservation training on both sides of the Atlantic. Eliza was invited to speak briefly. Standing before the assembled journalists, she felt strangely calm, as if Fioretta herself was lending her strength. Art connects us across centuries, she said simply. It reminds us that human creativity and vision transcend time, circumstance, even language. When I found this painting, or perhaps when it found me, I was struggling to believe in my own artistic path. Now, I understand that I'm part of something larger than myself, a continuum of creators stretching backward and forward through time. She glanced at the curtain display. Fioretta's portrait doesn't belong to me, or even solely to the Uffizi. It belongs to our shared cultural heritage. I'm grateful to have played a small role in bringing it back to light, and honored that, through the foundation bearing her name, Fioretta will continue inspiring new generations of artists. At Dr. Ricci's signal, Eliza stepped forward and drew back the curtains, revealing the portrait to public view for the first time in centuries. A collective murmur of appreciation rose from the crowd. Camera flashes illuminated Fioretta's serene profile, capturing for international audiences the luminous quality of Botticelli's mastery, the delicate modeling of features, the rich crimson of her dress, the architectural background opening to a distant Tuscan landscape. For Eliza, the moment held a poignant finality. The painting that had transformed her life would now belong to the world, viewed by thousands daily in the Uffizi's Botticelli room. Her own connection to it would become a footnote in art history, the struggling artist who had unknowingly donated a painting hiding a Renaissance masterpiece. As the formal presentation concluded and journalists clustered around Dr. Ricci and Professor Vespucci for additional comments, Eliza found herself standing alone before the portrait. In the flash of cameras and bustle of the press event, Fioretta's expression remained unchanged, the same serene gaze that had emerged from beneath layers of obscuring paint in Thomas's studio. She looks at home here, Alexandra said, joining her, as if she's been waiting to return all along. Eliza nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. It's never easy, letting go of something precious, Alexandra continued gently. Even when you know it's right. It's not really letting go, Eliza managed finally. It's setting her free, letting her be seen. Later that afternoon, as tourists began filtering into the newly reopened gallery space, Eliza stood in the Botticelli room, watching visitors discover Fioretta's portrait among the master's other works. Few would know the extraordinary journey that had brought it here, the centuries of obscurity, the chance purchase at an estate sale, the careful restoration that had revealed its hidden beauty. Thomas found her there, contemplating the painting now displayed in perfect museum lighting, the accompanying plaque briefly noting its remarkable rediscovery. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly. "Bittersweet," she admitted. "But right, she belongs here, among his other works, in the city where she lived. And what about you? Where do you belong now?" It was a profound question, one Eliza had been considering throughout her transformative journey. The financial security from the painting's sale had opened countless possibilities. She could live anywhere, pursue any path. "I'm staying in Seattle," she said with quiet certainty. "That's where my foundation is based, where I can do the most good. But I'll be traveling, teaching, learning, connecting with artists and conservators around the world." Thomas nodded approvingly. "And your own art? Evolving," she said with a small smile. "I'm exploring new directions without the pressure of commercial success. It's liberating." A group of schoolchildren entered the gallery, their teacher gathering them before Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Their young faces turned upward in wonder at the iconic image of beauty emerging from the sea. "That's what matters in the end," Eliza said softly, watching them. "Creating something that speaks across time, that makes someone stop and see the world differently, even for a moment." Thomas smiled. "You know, when I first saw your cityscape at the auction, before I recognized the frame, I was struck by something in your brushwork. A sincerity, a genuine vision. That's rarer than technical perfection." "You bid on my painting before you noticed the frame?" Eliza asked, surprised. "I did. The frame simply raised the stakes considerably." His eyes twinkled. "Alexandra noticed too. That's why she pushed up the bidding. We both saw something worth supporting, even before we suspected the hidden treasure." Eliza felt a rush of gratitude for this unexpected affirmation, that her own artistic voice had value, independent of the miraculous discovery that had transformed her circumstances. As afternoon light streamed through the gallery windows, casting golden illumination across Renaissance masterpieces, Eliza made her way toward the exit. She had said her private goodbye to Fioretta's portrait. Now it belonged to history, to the public, to future generations who would stand before it in wonder. Outside, Florence unfolded before her, the dome of the Duomo rising above Renaissance streets, the same streets Botticelli and Fioretta had walked 5 centuries earlier. Catherine waited at a cafe across the piazza, already planning their itinerary for the remainder of their stay. Eliza paused on the Uffizi steps, feeling the warm Italian sun on her face. The struggling artist who had faced eviction a year ago had been transformed, not just by unexpected fortune, but by connection, to history, to artistic legacy, to possibility. She thought of her grandfather's words, spoken so many years ago as they painted together on his porch. "Every painting has a story beneath it, Lizzie. Sometimes the most beautiful art is hidden beneath layers of something else entirely." How right he had been, in ways neither of them could have imagined. With one last glance at the gallery housing Fioretta's portrait, Eliza descended the steps toward her sister, toward Florence, toward the continuing story of her own artistic journey, no longer hidden, no longer struggling, but unfolding in the full light of possibility.